Hello and welcome to Good or Bad. Oh Jason, we love you so much! So I think it's time to take a look at the original Friday the 13th movie, which ironically doesn't have Jason in it. Friday the 13th was directed by Sean S. Cunningham and released in 1980. The film takes a lot of inspiration from Halloween. The writer Victor Miller even admitted that he was riding off of the success of Halloween. So let's head straight into Camp Crystal Lake. The movie kicks off in 1958 with the only way the Friday the 13th franchise was ever going to start. A couple having sex. Well, you've set the theme for the next 12 movies. And of course, they get killed. And I have to hand it to this movie, the music is brilliant. Harry Manfredini did a great job creating it. And then we get to enjoy over a minute of intro credits. Well, we've had worse. And now back to the present, 36 years ago, where we meet Annie Phillips, played by Robbie Morgan. She was christened by the Friday the 13th wiki page as being the nicest character in the whole Friday the 13th series. I thought it very important you know that. Annie is travelling to her new job at Camp Crystal Lake, which is being reopened after being closed down in 1958 because of murder. Oh look, she's saying hi to that dog. She is a nice person. She's gonna die, isn't she? Oh well, never mind. Ooh, almost naked people frolicking about. But they are not alone. Something sinister watches from the trees. And I swear to God, it was not me watching from the trees.
Oh! Oh! Something's wrong with Ned.
Oh my God, something's wrong with Ned! Who's Ned? Ned is played by Mike Nelson. Ned gets killed off screen later in the movie. Nobody likes Ned.
Come on, Ned.
Hurry up,
Come on.
Ned. Come on. Oh, Neddy!
Oh, Jesus!
Oh look, it's Friday the 13th's first fake-out scene. They grow up so fast. But enough of fake-outs, this is our main character. Unless you count the killer as the main character, in which case she is a non-killer main character. Although she does kill the killer, so... This is Alice! Alice is played by Adrienne King, and she finds a snake in her cabin. She screams for help and one of her friends comes in and kills the snake with a machete. Now this scene has become quite infamous because there were reports that the snake was real, the machete was real, and the hacking it to pieces was real. Now if that is true, this is easily my biggest problem with the movie because I don't think it is okay for an animal to be killed or injured for the benefit of a movie. That being said, if it wasn't real, they did a bloody good job making it look real. So anyway, back to the movie. A cop turns up saying he is looking for a guy named Ralph. He is apparently nuts and keeps blabbering on about murders that are yet to come. The cop leaves and we then meet Ralph, played by Walt Gorney.
I got to warn you. You're doomed to stay.
Oh, crazy Ralph. You try your hardest to warn them, but all you do is paint yourself as a suspect in the eyes of the audience. Because after all, if we cast our minds back to 1980, we had no idea who the real killer was. Because back then nobody had ever heard of Jason Voorhees or his mother, so for all we knew, Ralph could have been the killer. I remember reading that this character was used only to warn the other characters and not to add in another suspect. But what I don't understand is, why would this character need to warn them? Now that could work if they just gave him a backstory, explained a few things, gave us a few reasons. Because all he is right now is just another suspect. And all the cop said was that he was the town drunk, which isn't a lot to go on. Anyway, a storm starts rolling in, which means it's nearly murder o'clock. So while Kevin Bacon's character gives it to his girlfriend, we see that Ned has already been killed. And it was pretty well done, however, it would have been genius had they left out 30 seconds of the movie. Because we saw Ned walking along, then he goes off camera, which in my opinion is the last we should have seen of him. But we see an additional scene where he spots someone he doesn't recognise in one of the cabins, so he goes to investigate, and that is the last we see of him until he shows up dead. And don't get me wrong, it was good, but it would have been far better if we didn't know he was walking to his death. Because the second we saw that person in the cabin, that was it. His fate was sealed. But my reason for thinking it would have been better if they'd have just cut the film after he walks off camera is because the killer kills everyone silently. Nearly all of them get killed before any remaining survivor notices, so by simply cutting it after this scene, the audience wouldn't have noticed either, so it would have brought us closer to what was happening to all these characters in the movie. But even though it didn't happen that way, using off-screen deaths was a brilliant idea, because our imaginations fill in the gaps between when we last see this person alive and when they show up dead, and what we can think of is far worse than anything that this movie could ever show. But while I was going on about off-screen deaths, Jack has finished having sex with his girlfriend and is now laid back relaxing. Until he dies. But luckily for his girlfriend Marcia, she had already left by that point. But she dies too. Brenda gets drawn out of the cabin when she hears a call for help. Then Alice and Bill go looking for Brenda because they think they heard her scream. After searching for a while, they find a bloody hatchet. Oh, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for all of this. They come to the conclusion that bad stuff is happening, so they try to call for help, but the phone's not working, so they tried to leave by car, but that's not working either. But it's okay because the killer's busy with this guy. Sometime later, Alice is sleeping and Bill goes off on his own to try and get the generator working so they can have some proper light. When Alice wakes up, she goes looking for Bill but only finds his raincoat. Oh, and then she finds Bill. And this was another good use of the off-screen death technique. Although, that is not a good way to go. He got shot in the dick with an arrow! So Alice tries to secure herself in one of the cabins. Then Brenda is pushed through the window into the cabin. Alice runs from the body, but she sees a jeep pull up which looks like her boss's jeep. So she quickly runs out of the cabin, only to find Pamela Voorhees getting out of the jeep. She is played by Betsy Palmer, and is the absolute best thing about this movie. But before we go on, Pamela is the killer, as I'm sure a lot of you know, but Brenda was pushed through the window while Pamela was driving towards the cabin. How did Pamela have time to push Brenda through the cabin window, get in her car, drive round to the front of the cabin, all in such a short space of time? I suppose she could have parked near the window, pushed her through, and drove around while Alice was panicking, then turned on the headlights so Alice would notice. I've seriously overanalyzed this. Okay, so Pamela tells us her story and she drifts slowly from caring woman to crazy psychotic bitch.
His name was Jason.
His name was Jason. God, those words stay with you. And ever since her son died, she has been killing counsellors at Camp Crystal Lake. And we see that she hears Jason's voice in her head, even to the point that Jason controls her. But more than that, she speaks as if she is Jason. It's very Norman Bates, but twisted the other way around, so it's the mother living as both herself and her dead son. But instead of only half of Pamela wanting to kill, both the Jason in her and herself wants to kill. Unlike in Psycho, where it was the dominant mother personality that forced Norman Bates to kill. So I guess she is twice the killer that Norman Bates was. But anyway, Alice is the only one left for her to kill, and she tries and tries, but ultimately dies. Alice then climbs into a canoe and falls asleep. She dreams that she is being attacked by Jason, but wakes up in the hospital.
The boy. Is he dead too?
Who?
The boy, Jason.
The cops assure her that there was no boy in the lake, but Alice is sure there was.
Then he's still there.
So that is the original Friday the 13th. This movie may not have been the first slasher horror, but it certainly gave way for one of the greatest horror icons out there. My favourite thing about this movie, aside from Betsy Palmer, was ironically the lack of Betsy Palmer, because she only appeared at the very end. Instead, just like Jaws, they made use of basic camera movements and the music to stand in for a physical presence, and it worked brilliantly. I really do love that technique. However, I can only give this movie so much credit for using it, because A, Jaws did it first, and B, Jaws did it better. But come on, that was Jaws. To be even second to the master of first-person camera suspense is a huge compliment. And another thing that I really liked in this movie, which is rare for slasher films, was the characters. They genuinely seemed like real characters, not just the generic slasher film fodder. So let's talk about the killer. Friday the 13th is typically associated with this guy, and rightfully so. But he really has no part in this, so instead of a hulking figure in a hockey mask, we get a woman in a sweater. But not just any woman in a sweater. A deranged, psychotic, hell-bent on revenge woman in a sweater. And while she might not be as physically intimidating as Jason, she is way more interesting because of the psychological issues. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying she should have been in any of the other movies, because Jason is better long term, but for this one movie, she was the perfect killer.
Don't let her live. I won't, Jason. I won't.
I've gone on a lot about exposition in the past, and I've previously stated that Friday the 13th as a franchise dealt with exposition really well. And this movie is no exception. We open seeing two murders in 1958, and while Annie is getting a lift nearer to Crystal Lake, she's told about why the place closed down. Which is 100% believable, which is the key to good exposition. In the past, I've heard other people label this movie as a mystery killer movie. But I'm gonna shoot that one down right now. Granted, we don't see the killer until the very end. However, the killer is revealed to be no one that the movie has previously shown us. So it was impossible to work out who the killer was. Therefore, it is not a mystery killer movie. The lack of seeing the killer was used only to create suspense, not to create a mystery for us to solve. So yes, Friday the 13th is a great slasher movie, even though some of the more impressive techniques have been used in other movies before it. So if you love slasher movies, let's face it, you've already seen this. You have been watching Good or Bad, and I'll see you next time. When Alice wakes up, When Alice wakes up, she can... What the fuck? When Alice wakes up, she can...